Thanks for the lovely introduction, Siobhan. And firstly, I do like to apologise. I woke up this morning and I lost my voice. I don't know how, but I did have an early night though. So for some of you, my name is Emma and I'm a research officer at the National Drug Research Institute at Curtin University. So today I'm going to be presenting this presentation on behalf of the Beyond Violence team in WA, but also in New South Wales. So the Beyond Violence project is a trial of a prison-based intervention for Aboriginal and non-Aboriginal women who use force in Western Australia. So just before we start, I would like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land in which I stand on today, the land of Dungawa people. I respect their continuing culture and contribution they make to the life of this city and this region. I would also like to extend an acknowledgement of country on the land in which I have lived and worked for the past 10 years, and also where this research took part, the land of the Whadjuk people of the Noongar Nation of the southwest of Western Australia. I would also like to welcome and acknowledge all other First Nations people who are gathering here today, but also for those who are listening online as well. So just a bit of, a bit of an outline of today's presentation. So firstly, I'll provide a little bit of a brief introduction of the team behind the Beyond Violence project and some of its international partnership. And I will then move on to discuss some of the relevant literature and recent data on what we know about violence incarcerated in violent offences in Australia, but also in WA. So I will touch a little bit about some of the work that was done in Western Australia, which is the background work for this current project. Thirdly, as we do acknowledge the high overrepresentation of Indigenous First Nations people in our justice system, I will also outline some of the relevant literature and data behind Indigenous violence, the use of violence, and their incarceration rates, with a particular focus on WA. Fourthly, we'll then take you through to the historical background of the Beyond Violence program and some of the theoretical frameworks that were actually guiding the program. And following on, we'll then look at some of the key themes reflecting the voices of the women themselves, which is one of the key aspects of the focus of this presentation. So we gathered some of the feedback that was helping us improve the program, not just the content of the program, but also the overall feedback from the women about their experiences of participating in the program. And then we'll do a summary, sorry. Here we go, sorry. So the Beyond Violence program targets women incarcerated for violent offences, and it was originally developed in the US by an American psychologist, Dr. Stephanie Covington, and it's currently being trialled in Western Australia as part of the NHMRC funded research project, which it's led by Professor Tony Butler at the University of New South Wales, and Dr. Mandy Wilson and Dr. Jocelyn Jones from the National Drug Research Institute. So although this program was developed in the US and it was subject to a number of several modifications reflecting our local situation and ensuring that the concepts and some of the approaches that we use are culturally safe for Indigenous women, for Australian women, but also, more importantly, for First Nations women. All of the program modifications were made under the guidance of the Aboriginal researchers involved and an Aboriginal Women's Working Party led by Dr. Jocelyn Jones and Dr. Hannah McGlade. So just a bit of special acknowledgement and thanks to the women who have shared their stories with us. We are grateful for their insights and contribution to this program. And we also like to acknowledge the WA Department of Justice for their assistance and support for the conduct of this research. So just a bit of background, going back, so between 2009 to 2019, the number of people in Australia prisons grew by 47%, and which is although women consist of a very small number of that population, which is approximately 8%. Over the past decade, the number of women who have been incarcerated with violent offences has increased significantly. And the growing number of women incarcerated for violent offences is one of the concerning trends that we see. And of particular concern is the overrepresentation of Aboriginal women among those statistics. So based on recent data, Indigenous women are one of the fastest growing subgroups within the Australian prisoner population. While Indigenous women only account for 3% of the adult female population, Australian population, they however represent 34% of the female prison population, which brings them 14.8 times more likely than their non-Indigenous to be find themselves in prison. I think it's also the growing number of women incarcerated for violent offences themselves. And it's quite important to actually reflect on the fact that these women are mothers and carers of children, and the long-term impacts that it has on their incarceration, on the lives of their children, as well as the communities that they come from, should be prioritised and considered. So I just want to touch, so statistics gives us a bit of sort of background to see that, yes, we do have a problem, but however, it doesn't provide us with much more in-depth information of what's driving that large number of Indigenous people in the justice sector. While I do want to acknowledge that there is some fantastic work that's been done previously and was capturing a lot of work around some of the contributing factors, especially in WA alone, of what's driving that. So I'm not going to be focusing on the mandatory sentencing and the police interaction, but I will be focusing on the Indigenous women's use of violence and how they led to their violent offending. Sorry, excuse me. So it's a bit of a foundational study behind the project. So back in 2017, Dr. Mandy Wilson and others have conducted, draw on the study, thank you. Draw on the study, sorry, apologies. 84 incarcerated Indigenous mothers in WA. And what they found from those findings is that women's use of violence was often related to their experiences of multiple traumas, and a means of resolving family grievances and responding to violent behaviour from their partners, but also the need to protect themselves. So results also shows that women in prison are survivors of violence, and their history of violent victimisation often contributes their contact with the criminal justice system, and system which in some way responding to the violence that they were experiencing, but also indirect ways such as taking into account some of the drug and alcohol factors and other habits which may have compromised their health and well-being. So violence in Indigenous communities is often is such a complex problem with its own characteristics. And as evident in some of the work that was conducted in WA remote areas, conducted by the Professor Harry Black, and there's not much work documenting the experiences of, especially for women who are incarcerated for violent offences. But what they found is that evidence to show that Indigenous women and violence shows the Indigenous violence cannot be effectively addressed by starting from the dominant conception of a white perpetrator trying to control the life of his partner through coercive control behaviour. The violence women experience, characterised by fights which are often related to aspects of Indigenous lifestyles, and particularly in remote communities. So here are some of the perspective around Indigenous and violence, where, drawing from the work of Tupert and Cox, that in terms of Indigenous women's use of violence, should be viewed in a much more broader context associated with Indigenous trauma and the effects of ongoing colonisation, cultural dispossession and discrimination. And further studies also, it's not an exhaustive list, but there was also studies conducted in WA across, shows the ongoing issues of trauma related to Indigenous women involvement in the criminal justice. And it described the removal of Aboriginal children at the start of colonisation as impacting on that mental health, wellbeing and parenting skills of those affected. And of greater concern is the fact that 80% of these women that find themselves in prison are mothers and primary carers of young children. And this is more outspoken when it comes to Indigenous women, because in traditional Aboriginal communities, all women are considered mothers due to the kinship structure and the responsibilities that they have for their children and the relatives and their extended families. So there is the sort of intergenerational sort of impact, the long-term impacts that it will have on, especially when we see a high number of Indigenous women cycle through the justice sector. So, as I mentioned earlier, the Beyond Violence was developed by an American psychologist, Stephanie Covington, and it's a program for women incarcerated for violent offences. It's a manualised intervention and it's a tertiary prevention program, which deals with the violence and trauma that these women have experienced, as well as the violence that they may have committed. The program is gender-specific and privileges women's experiences of victimisation, their social roles as women in their communities, substance abuse and mental health issues. So the Beyond Violence focuses on anger and utilises a multi-level approach through a variety of evidence-based therapeutic strategies such as psychoeducation, role-playing, mindfulness, cognitive behaviour restructuring, and to help. So these are all the things that they've done in the program to help address issues of mental health and substance abuse, trauma histories and anger regulation. So the Beyond Violence treatment employs the trauma theory as the basis for the intervention, which trauma theories is grounded on the understanding that exposure to trauma impacts on understanding of and responses to life events. And in addition to the trauma theory, the Beyond Violence adopts the socio-ecological model, which you're probably all familiar with. And this was drawn from the work of Dolbeck and Grag back in 2002. And it's the framework that it was actually endorsed by the World Health Organization, and the framework that recognises the interplay of individual, interpersonal, community and societal and cultural factors. So as you can see that it is an intensive program. It was ran in Bandiat Prison, so it's been running for about 3 to 4 years now. We have come to an end of that trial, so it runs 20 sessions and it's been running over 10 weeks. 10 weeks, sorry, my brain's elsewhere. So the research trialling of the Beyond Violence in Western Australia is an before and after trial. It's conducted over 5 years. So during the 2019, the program was run twice over a 10-week period with one Aboriginal and one non-Aboriginal facilitator in the program. Participation was voluntary. The controls were recruited over the first year to avoid cross-contamination. And currently we have 110 women who are in the control group, and these are the women who receive treatment as normal in the prison. At the moment, 37 women have now graduated from the program, which they have completed 80% or more of the program. 33 women are in the intent to treat group, which have done some parts of the program, and 69% of those women are First Nations women. So, just go back there. So the primary aim of the study is to evaluate the effectiveness of the program to reduce recidivism among Aboriginal and non-Aboriginal women with a current or historical convictions of a violent offence. And the secondary aim we do is to examine the effectiveness of the Beyond Violence on the 3, 9 and 15-month measures. So this is the community follow-up in the community post-release, where it measures of depression, symptoms of PTSD, anger and alcohol and other drug use using a baseline survey. So with our screening criteria, so women are initially referred to us by the transitional manager. So we do get a list of through the prison-based contact, as you see below with the boxes. The research, we then go on and meet with the women to check their eligibility and discuss the project. So if they're eligible and interested in the program, we then take part and we obtain consent and conduct a baseline interview with them. So I'll take you through to that. So the baseline is completed by both the control and program groups. And the survey utilises a variety of evidence-based tools and asks questions around anger, depression, anxiety, alcohol and other drug use, past traumas and experiences with violence. So the interview usually takes about between 60 to 90 minutes. And it may require more than one visit, so depending on what is happening with the women or in the prison. And as part of their eligibility to take part, the women consent to being followed up in the community, to participate in a very similar interview of the 3, 9 and 15 months follow-up in the community. Additionally, the women give us permission as part of our ethics approval to access or follow up their TOMS or total offending management system that used by corrective services for the next 10 years, and that will allow us to compare reoffending data between the two groups. So the exciting part, yeah. Okay, so all women in the program, and this is probably one of the things that I'd like to focus on. It was the feedback from the women in terms for us to improve on the program content and delivery and some of the things that the approaches that we make. We want the feedback from the women because they're the ones that are actually doing the program, which is quite important sort of work. So all women receive feedback and they were offered opportunity to provide feedback to the researchers about midway through on their experiences of taking part of the program and what could be done differently to improve content and delivery. So based on the women's feedback, we have highlighted some of the key themes that came out of their feedback. A lot of the women reflect on their understanding, sharing their understanding and awareness of what they've learned in the program, and also reflecting a lot more on the impacts of the violence and understanding about their behaviour and a lot of awareness. So we'll go through it. They also touched on a lot of the need for more support in the community was the big thing that they reflect on. Building trust in the prison base and also some of the challenges that they've faced, especially when you deliver a therapeutic sort of trauma-informed sort of program in a prison setting. So we'll get to see some of the feedback. So the women were asked whether they noticed any changes in their behaviour or their reactions and behaviour since commencing the Beyond Violence program, and their responses indicate that the program participation results in a growing sense of self-awareness and understanding. So some of the quotes that was read from the women. I forgot about this one. Okay, so in the beginning, so there's one woman said, in the beginning I didn't talk, I didn't like talking about my feelings. I felt it didn't matter. And now I realise it all matters, it's worth talking about it. And another woman also, and this is also a reflection on some of the understanding, not just within learning about themselves mentally and emotionally, but also recognising those physical with their body when they're when learning about anger and emotions. So the program is good, it changes you into a different person in a positive way. You gain an understanding of what anger can do to you in ways I didn't know before, and it gives you a lot of wisdom. Another woman talks about that how the program had helped me identify my triggers and gives me the tools to reach out for help and stop physical pain. So another woman there say, when I first came to prison, I was always an angry person, always sent down the back for getting into trouble. But since doing the program, haven't been in trouble or sent down the back. So I think it's quite really important to recognise the sort of the resilience, the strength of these women, and also taking the time to actually making changes about themselves, because we believe that they are the experts in their own lives. And recognising those sort of changes through their behaviour and attending, it means a lot. And we do acknowledge the way they share their stories, because the journey is not as easy as we think. So women also reflected. Women also reflected on the significance of learning and acceptance, and reflecting on the past, present and future as a healing process for themselves and the people around them. So one of the women comment, there you go. So it helped me, so what it says, course helped me realise how I depend on others. It made me aware of distressing situations. Instead of turning a blind eye, I've learned to communicate, approach people, and I've learned to put myself first. The other comment was also about, now that I understand what happened to me on the outside, and I know what I did in the past was wrong, but I wasn't thinking. So there's lots of awareness, sort of self-awareness and understanding around why that of their offending behaviour that led them in the justice space. So, and I think that sort of acknowledgement of the women, that we do celebrate some of the things and the positive sort of things that came out of the program, of what they've learned. The other one, I found the program interesting. It opened eyes to the types of domestic violence, such as emotional abuse. And we do also acknowledge that a lot of women that are coming into the program did not understand the types of abuse that they have been experiencing on the outside, and providing that sort of education in a very safer environment. And it's such a sort of uplifting for them and also for themselves to be able to overcome challenges that they've been through. There's one comment that was quite interesting, is there was an incident with an officer, shows how much we've changed because we've dealt with it calmly. The old me would have turned into incredible hope, but now it's changed. So the women were also given opportunity to speak about what are some of any suggestions and future recommendations for change, which they had regard with in terms of program delivery and content. So women felt, especially we received quite a bit of overwhelming feedback from the women, felt that they would benefit from a program such as the Beyond Violence in the community. So not only for themselves, but also targeting family members and partners of, and in the community. So one of the Aboriginal participants have commented on the first, Beyond Violence should be recognised over, not only in prison, should be for couples, there should be more support in the community. One participant also commented on, in our community, it's like a disease and there's a lot of violence everywhere. It would have been good to have the program a long time ago. Another participant also stressed that it would be good to have this course extended in the community, to my community and all my family members, especially when I went through domestic violence, and would be good to have the support from my mob and myself. So there is the urgent need, and we recognise that that is something that we're actually, we're not doing very well in this space in terms of post-release supports to the women, and especially targeting trauma-informed programs targeting women with violence. And we do acknowledge that, and we would love to see this sort of program extend to the community rather than in a prison-based environment. So I'll take you through to some of the other interesting sort of feedback from the women. And also I've put, so this is sort of kind of like relate to one of the reports, the task force reports in 2000, and also some of the work of Tubic and Cox in WA, looking at Indigenous women and violence. It says that the anger and rage caused by family and domestic violence can be manifested in violence if there are insufficient boundaries and safety factors in place in the community. So there is sort of correlation around the need for that sort of support in the community themselves. So many women spoke of their difficulty trusting others, and Facilitator works hard to establish a report early to stress the importance of group rules, where confidentiality and respect, safety were prioritised. This contrasted with... So if you see some of the feedback that was presented, it gives a sense of that conflict, between the two cultures within the prison-based environment. And they do share quite openly about their experiences of engaging with a community-based approach, and whereas in comparison to the corrective space where they have the program. So feedback from the women indicates a sense of conflict between the two cultures. Confidentiality and building trust is more difficult to ensure in a setting in which security and control are prioritised and when trust is not the norm. So it's a reflection of what one of the participants say: we're surrounded by officers a lot, but I feel I can open up and engage more with BV staff because they understand us better and relate better. There's also comment on facilitators get me and understand my situation better. They help me understand more about myself, and they're more relatable because they share their own experiences. There are also women spoke about the reciprocal, their relationship with the facilitators. We're reciprocal, no judgment. They respect us and not quick to jump into conclusion. Feel like we are being heard, a lot different to officers. So it's not some sort of criticism of the conflicting between the two cultures and the two approaches, but when it comes to the therapeutic environment and delivering the sort of environment, you, especially with the Beyond Violence focus of wanting to change lives, and we see the prison from this perspective as a non-therapeutic sort of environment for women to actually heal, which is some of the work that was also, I want to acknowledge, that was done around that as well. And it was quite refreshing hearing some of this sort of feedback. So a common theme that was also arose during feedback was the suitability of the environment where the program took place, and that was the setting itself. So programs are unpredictable spaces and places in space, especially private space is at a premium. Most of the time, Beyond Violence was run in the rooms attached to the largest units in the prison. And the room was small, no curtains, windows, sound travelled through the walls and curious. So you see people, lots of disruptions, and also not just within the environment space, but also the interaction within the prison in terms of communication delayed, interrupted due to COVID outbreaks, and also some of the lockdowns. And so there's lots of different sort of distractions around that's impacting on their learning, but also on their journey to recovery. So you see some of the comments. Unit 2 is a bit dirty, disruptive. There's loud music, screaming and loud talking and peeping through the window. There's often communication breakdown, and COVID disruption interfered and made me forget what I've done. Facilitators make me feel safe. They get me, no power and control, easy to talk to, and encourage me to utilise strategies I learned to cope in prison. So this is one of the most... we do want to acknowledge and recognise, despite the challenges that these women have been through, and these women have been cycled through in and out of the prison system, and learning about themselves and willing to change themselves. We do acknowledge that their self-determination, their resilience and strength into utilising what they've learned to change their life around. And by just listening to what they've shared and through their stories, it's quite empowering. So not just for the facilitator, but also for themselves. Sorry. So Aboriginal, given the very large number of Indigenous women involved in the program, which 69% of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander women, there were Aboriginal participants were invited to share their worldviews and perspective on how the program content could be improved culturally, which the BV team has taken into consideration to ensure that program content is culturally relevant and safe for Aboriginal women in the program. So, again, as you can see, that some of the feedback stressed the importance of programs understanding family violence from a cultural lens. So I'll just read some of the feedback. So one Indigenous woman commented, "It's good to have an Indigenous facilitator who is supportive and understand what us girls are talking about." So that sense of connection to that they can more relate to, they can open to, if having another Indigenous facilitator. And this is part of the modifications that they've done in the program when it was is to at least have a non-Indigenous facilitator in the program that actually run, considering the large number of Indigenous people in prison and are actually doing the program. For Aboriginal women, violence is very much part of our lives. So we fight with each other but love each other. Violence is not serious to us. So again, it really does speak of and contextualise the meaning of violence in terms of Indigenous communities. And it's something that's also, I'll read the last question then, where it says, "A white man will reason with his missus, but this is not the case in Aboriginal culture. Facilitator needs to understand these cultural differences and the differences between white and Aboriginal laws and punishment." So it is quite critical to reflecting on some of the voices of these women, especially when it comes to Indigenous culture and how we deliver the program, the uses of approaches that we use that help us inform. And the critical role of Aboriginal community. And this is also reflecting on the critical role of Aboriginal community in implementing culture-secure healing and prevention intervention in addressing family violence. So in the Beyond Violence program, even though that it's been a program that was from the US, and they did a lot of modifications, so a lot of the contents that the Aboriginal Women's Working Group and some of the Aboriginal researchers there, the feedback has helped inform and change content to be able to suit the women in the program. But I'll talk more about when it gets to the implication bits on that. So some of the key messages, didn't really provide something here. So from the voices of the women or the feedback, it's critical to recognise women's strength and resilience through their recovery journey, but also, given that the large number of these women incarcerated with violent offences are themselves victims of domestic and sexual assault, which is 90% of those women are victims of violence themselves. So we do like to acknowledge their strength and resilience in sharing their stories and making an impact in changing their lives. We also, what we have learned from the voices of these women is recognising and understanding the complexity of the interrelationships of individuals and their interpersonal relationships with their community, societal and cultural factors, and their pathways to violence. So although there's no one course. We also like to recognise that through the voices of these women, it speaks about prison as a challenging environment for healing and the need for a shifting perspective in creating a safer space and environment for women to heal. We also, from the voices of the women, we do take into consideration the urgent need for more gender-responsive and trauma-informed programs and supports in the community for women and their families. And also, more importantly, listening to Aboriginal women or Indigenous women who are in the program, the importance of understanding violence from an Aboriginal culture lens and family dynamics in addressing and implementing violent prevention programs for Aboriginal women. And I just want to leave it there, sorry, but thank you.